Before there was a garden, before there was a serpent, before God said, "Let there be light," there may have been a war. A real war, at least in the minds of the people who first told this story. Gods clashing, blood spilling, a monster the size of the ocean itself, getting torn apart so that the sky could exist. That's not a metaphor I'm exaggerating for effect. That's literally how one ancient civilization believed the universe began. And here's the unsettling part. This story was already old, already being recited in temples, already carved into clay, centuries before anyone wrote down the opening lines of Genesis. So the question tonight is simple, but it's the kind of question that unravels everything you thought you knew about where our creation stories come from. Did the people who eventually wrote the Bible know this older story? Were they responding to it? Borrowing from it? Rejecting it on purpose? Or is this just two ancient cultures separately trying to answer the same impossible question, staring up at the same stars, asking the same thing every human has ever asked? Where did all this come from? The story I'm talking about is called the Enuma Elish. And before you picture some forbidden scroll hidden in a vault somewhere, let me clear something up right away. This isn't a secret alternative Bible, it's not a lost gospel, it's not a conspiracy. The Enuma Elish is a Babylonian creation epic, written in Akkadian, discovered on clay tablets buried under the sands of Iraq for thousands of years. It survived. That's the remarkable part. Most of what ancient Mesopotamia believed about the universe simply vanished, crumbled to dust, lost forever. But this one didn't. This one made it out. And what it describes is nothing like the calm, orderly creation you might expect. There's no single god speaking the world into existence with quiet authority. Instead, there's Tiamat, a primordial goddess of saltwater chaos, vast and ancient, older than the gods themselves. There's Marduk, a young warrior god who rises up out of nowhere with terrifying power, offered a deal that will change the shape of the cosmos. There's a battle for supremacy among the gods, a fight over who gets to rule, who gets to be worshipped, who gets to sit at the top of creation. It reads less like scripture and more like a myth of divine kingship being violently established through combat. And that's exactly why, for the last century and a half, scholars have been drawn to this text like moths to a flame. Because when you place the Enuma Elish next to the opening chapters of Genesis, side by side, some of the parallels are eerie. Watery chaos before creation, a sequence of ordered days, humanity fashioned deliberately, purposefully from something else. The echoes are there. Whether those echoes mean direct influence, shared cultural inheritance across the ancient Near East, or something else entirely, that's the investigation we're going on tonight. We're not here to tell you the Bible copied Babylon, and we're not here to tell you it's pure coincidence either. Real history is messier than either extreme, and honestly, that messiness is what makes it so fascinating. So we'll dig into where these tablets were found, what the story actually says, how Babylon saw itself as the center of a divinely ordered cosmos, and finally, what happens when you place these two ancient creation stories side by side and really look. Before we go further, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing these comments roll in from every time zone on Earth. And if stories like this help you unwind or drift off at night, the best way to support the show is to follow it on Spotify. Listen there, and if you enjoy it, leave a 5-star review. Links in the description. It genuinely helps more than you'd think. Now, let's go back. Back before Genesis, back before Babylon was even Babylon, back to when the waters had no name. So how does a story like this actually survive for thousands of years? It's not like someone kept a single leather-bound copy on a shelf, dusting it off every few centuries. There was no continuous chain of monks copying it out, no unbroken tradition passing it down, like we imagine happened with parts of the Bible. The Enuma Elish disappeared completely. For over 2,000 years, nobody on Earth could read it, recite it, or even remember that it existed. And then, in the 1800s, it came back from the dead. Here's how. In the ruins of ancient Nineveh, once the glittering capital of the Assyrian Empire, sitting near modern-day Mosul in Iraq, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary. A library. Not a library like we picture today with shelves of books, but a massive collection of clay tablets, tens of thousands of them, commissioned by an Assyrian king named Ashurbanipal in the 7th century BCE. Ashurbanipal was obsessed with knowledge. He sent scribes across his empire with orders to copy and collect texts on medicine, astronomy, law, religion, magic, basically anything that had ever been written down. His library was an attempt to gather the accumulated wisdom of Mesopotamian civilization in one place. And buried in that collection, broken, scattered, some pieces missing entirely, were the tablets containing the Enuma Elish. For centuries after Nineveh fell, this library sat buried under mounds of earth, completely forgotten. Nobody knew it was there. Nobody knew cuneiform script, those strange wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay, even meant anything. It just looked like scratches to anyone who stumbled across a broken tablet. The knowledge was there, physically present in the ground, but functionally as lost as if it had never existed at all. Then, in the 19th century, archaeologists began excavating the mounds of ancient Assyria, and they started pulling tablets out of the dirt by the thousands. But finding the tablets was only half the battle. Someone had to actually figure out what the marks meant. That process, called decipherment, took decades of painstaking work by scholars comparing inscriptions, cross-referencing languages, slowly cracking a code that had gone silent for 2 millennia. It's honestly one of the most underrated intellectual achievements in modern history. Imagine reconstructing an entire dead language from broken fragments of clay, with no dictionary, no teacher, nothing but pattern recognition and stubborn persistence. By the 1870s, scholars had progressed far enough to start translating the Enuma Elish tablets, and that's when people realized what they were actually looking at. A creation epic, older than almost anything else in the biblical world. Now, here's where we need to be careful, because this detail matters a lot. The tablets found at Nineveh, the ones in Ashurbanipal's library, are relatively late copies. We're talking 7th century BCE, but scholars are confident the story itself is much older, probably composed sometime around the 18th to 12th century BCE, during the height of Babylonian power. So what we have isn't the original manuscript. It's a copy of a copy, preserving a tradition that had already been recited, retold, and passed down for centuries before Ashurbanipal's scribes ever pressed a stylus into wet clay. And it's not even a complete copy. The tablets are damaged. Chunks are missing. Some sections exist in multiple versions that don't perfectly agree with each other, forcing scholars to piece together the most likely original text from fragments scattered across different excavations and different museum collections around the world. That might sound frustrating, but it's actually the normal condition of almost everything we know from the ancient world. Nothing survives perfectly. Everything is fragmentary to some degree. So why does any of this matter before we even get into what the story says? Because when people compare the Enuma Elish to Genesis, they're not comparing two clean, complete, perfectly preserved texts sitting side by side. They're comparing a reconstructed ancient epic, pieced together from broken clay, to a text with its own long and complicated history of transmission. Understanding how fragile and accidental this survival really was changes how carefully we should treat the comparisons that are coming next. And even its title tells you something important about the kind of text this was. Enuma Elish is not really a title in the modern sense. It simply means "when on high," taken from the poem's opening words in Akkadian. Ancient Mesopotamian texts were often named this way. You didn't invent a dramatic title and put it on the cover. You identified the work by its first line. When on high the heaven had not been named, and below the earth had not been called by name. That is how the story begins. Not with a finished world, not with humans, not even with gods in the form we would recognize later. It begins before the sky has a name, before the earth has boundaries, before the universe has been divided into the ordered categories that make life possible. But Enuma Elish was never just a story people read alone for entertainment. It was a ritual text, a political text, a religious declaration about why the world was ordered the way it was, why Babylon mattered, and why Babylon's chief god, Marduk, deserved to stand above all the others. The standard version scholars reconstruct was arranged across 7 clay tablets. 7 sections, each one carrying the story forward from primordial chaos to cosmic order, from divine conflict to the building of Babylon itself. The tablets are not all the same length, and the surviving copies are not perfectly identical. Ancient scribes copied texts by hand, and traditions could shift slightly from city to city or century to century. But the 7-tablet structure is clear enough that it was almost certainly deliberate, and 7 is not random. By the end of the epic, Marduk receives 50 names, each name describing another dimension of his authority. He is warrior, king, judge, creator, protector, organizer of the heavens, master of fate. The poem builds toward that moment almost like a royal coronation ceremony stretched across the scale of the entire cosmos. First, there is disorder, then a crisis, then war, then victory. Then a new world built under the authority of the victorious god. The structure itself makes an argument. Order is not automatic. Civilization is not natural. The universe in this story exists because someone powerful defeated chaos and imposed rules on it. And once you understand when the Enuma Elish was recited, that argument becomes much more intense. In Babylon, the epic was associated with the Akitu festival, the great New Year celebration held in the spring, around the first month of the Babylonian calendar. This was not a minor holiday. It was one of the most important events in the religious and political life of the city. For days, temples filled with priests, officials, processions, offerings, ceremonies, and crowds. The king himself played a role. The gods were honored. The city reenacted, renewed, and reaffirmed the order of the world. According to ritual texts from Babylon, the Enuma Elish was recited during this festival, traditionally on the 4th day. Think about that for a second. At the moment when a new year was beginning, when people were looking ahead to the next harvest, the next flood season, the next cycle of danger and survival, the priests recited a story about the universe almost collapsing into violence before being saved by Babylon's god. That wasn't just religious theatre, it was a way of making the coming year feel secure. Every ancient farming society understood how fragile order could be. One failed harvest could bring hunger. A river could flood too high or not high enough. Disease could move through a city. Armies could appear over the horizon. Kings could die. Dynasties could collapse. The world could look stable right up until the moment it didn't. So during Akitu, Babylon did not merely celebrate that another year had arrived. It confronted the possibility that order might fail, then ritually declared that order had been restored. The Enuma Elish made that restoration cosmic. The same god who defeated the primordial forces of chaos was also the god who protected Babylon now. The same divine authority that separated heaven from earth, fixed the stars in their courses, and established the seasons was understood to stand behind the city's temples, its king, its laws, and its place in the world. This is why calling the poem just a myth can be misleading. Today, when people use the word myth, they often mean something fictional, may be interesting, may be symbolic, but disconnected from reality. For the Babylonians, this story was woven into reality. It was performed in the middle of one of the most important public festivals of the year. It was tied to actual buildings, actual priesthoods, actual political power, actual fears about the future. The god Marduk had a temple in Babylon, the Esagila. His cult had administrators, ritual specialists, land, wealth, and influence. The story was not floating in some imaginary ancient world. It was part of the machinery of Babylonian life, and Babylon needed that machinery. Because Babylon was not always the natural centre of Mesopotamia, before its rise other cities had been dominant. Uruk, Nippur, Kish, Ashur, much farther north, would become the heart of the Assyrian Empire. Mesopotamia was never one permanent unified kingdom. It was a crowded landscape of cities, temples, kings, rival gods, shifting alliances, invasions, and competing claims to legitimacy. So if Babylon was going to say, "Our city is the centre of the world," it needed more than walls and armies. It needed a cosmic explanation. The Enuma Elish provided one. In the poem, Marduk does not begin as the unquestioned ruler of all gods. He rises during a crisis. The older gods are threatened. They are terrified. They need someone capable of facing a force none of them can defeat. Marduk agrees to fight, but on one condition: if he wins, the other gods must recognize his supreme authority. That is a very Babylonian kind of deal. Power has to be proven. Authority has to be granted. Kingship emerges from a crisis and becomes legitimate through victory. Marduk does not simply inherit the universe, he earns it, and then the other gods formally confirm it. You can see why this would resonate in a world of ambitious kings and expanding states. A city that defeats its rivals can claim not only military strength, but divine favour. A king who maintains order can present himself as participating in the same basic work Marduk performed at the beginning of time, holding chaos back. This does not mean the Enuma Elish was nothing but propaganda. That word can flatten things too much. The poem had religious meaning. It addressed profound questions. Why is there a world instead of chaos? Why do humans exist? Why are the gods arranged in a hierarchy? Why must people serve in temples and maintain sacred order? But it also had political consequences. In ancient Babylon, religion and government were not separate categories the way modern people often imagine them. The gods owned the cities. Temples managed enormous resources. Kings ruled with divine approval, or at least claimed they did. A creation story could explain the structure of heaven and, at the same time, explain the structure of society on earth. That is what makes Enuma Elish so much more than an ancient curiosity. Every year, as Babylon entered its New Year festival, the people were reminded that their city was not just one city among many. In the logic of the poem, Babylon was built into the architecture of the cosmos. Marduk's victory made the ordered world possible, and Babylon, his chosen city, became the place where that order was maintained. The story was about the beginning of everything, but it was also about the present tense. It told Babylonians who was in charge, where sacred authority lived, and what could happen if order ever broke down. And before Marduk could become the god who saves the cosmos, there had to be a cosmos worth saving. Or rather something far older and stranger than a cosmos. A world before heaven and earth, before land and sky, where everything began in the dark mingling of primordial waters. That phrase, the dark mingling of primordial waters, is not just poetic imagery. It is the actual starting point of the Enuma Elish, before heaven had been named, before earth had been called into being. Before there were fields, cities, stars, temples, kings, or human beings, there were waters. two waters, Apsu, the fresh water, and Tiamat, the salt water. The opening lines of the poem introduce them as the first beings, but they are also more than beings in the modern sense. They are cosmic realities. Apsu represents the fresh waters beneath the earth, the underground reservoirs, springs, channels, and hidden sources that made agriculture possible in Mesopotamia. Tiamat represents the saltwater sea, the vast and dangerous waters beyond the settled land. And at the beginning these two waters are mixed together, not separated, not organized, not yet turned into a world. That is one of the first major differences between the Enuma Elish and the way many modern people imagine creation. We often picture the beginning as empty space, nothing at all, a black void with no matter, no motion, no life. But Mesopotamian creation does not begin with nothingness. It begins with something too much like everything. Water without boundaries, water before rivers have banks, water before sea and land are divided, water before the sky is lifted above the earth. An undifferentiated mass, fertile and dangerous at the same time. Think of it like trying to imagine the world before anyone had drawn lines on a map. No countries, no cities, no roads, no fields, no place where one thing ends and another begins. Now take that idea even further. No land, no sky, no dry ground, no fixed direction, no names, just the mingling of fresh water and salt water in the darkness before the universe has taken shape. For the ancient Babylonians, this was not an abstract idea pulled out of nowhere. Water governed their lives. Mesopotamia was a land built between rivers, especially the Tigris and Euphrates. Those rivers brought mud, water, crops, transport, fish, reeds, and the possibility of cities. Without water, there was no barley. Without barley, no bread, no beer, no temple offerings, no surplus, no civilization. But the same rivers could also destroy everything. A flood could tear through canals, drown animals, wash away homes, and ruin a harvest just before it was ready. Water could come too late. It could come too violently. It could turn fields into mud or leave them cracked under the sun. And beyond the river plain was the sea, connected to trade and travel, but also storms, uncertainty, and a horizon that seemed to lead into the unknown. So when the Enuma Elish says that the first reality was water, it is saying something Mesopotamian people would have felt in their bones. Life comes from water, and destruction comes from water too. That is why it is too simple to say Tiamat is just the chaos monster. You will hear that phrase a lot, especially in popular retellings. Tiamat becomes a giant dragon, a female embodiment of chaos, the enemy of order waiting to be defeated by a heroic god. And later in the poem, she does become terrifying. She raises an army. She creates monstrous allies. She goes to war. But at the beginning, that is not who she is. At the beginning, Tiamat is primordial salt water. She is one of the sources of existence itself. She is not merely an evil force, threatening a good universe. She is part of the original condition from which the gods emerge. Apsu is the same. He is not initially a villain. He is fresh water, the deep subterranean source beneath the visible world. In some Mesopotamian ideas, the underground freshwater realm was imagined as a vast cosmic reservoir. You could not see it, but springs rose from it. Wells reached into it. Rivers depended on it. Apsu and Tiamat are not simply characters standing in a blank room at the beginning of time. They are the raw materials of the universe, and from their mingling, the younger gods begin to appear. First come Lamu and Lahamu. Their names may be connected to mud or silt, which makes sense in a world where water and land are not yet fully separated. Then come Anshar and Kishar, whose names are often understood as something like whole heaven and whole earth, or the great cosmic horizons from which those realms will emerge. Then comes Anu, the sky god, then Ea, also called Enki in Sumerian tradition, the god of wisdom, magic, craft, and the deep fresh waters. And suddenly, the universe has generations. That matters because the Enuma Elish is not just a creation story. It is a family story, a divine family story, which means it is also a story about inheritance, authority, resentment, and the terrifying moment when children become too powerful for their parents. At first, the younger gods are simply there, multiplying and moving within the primordial waters. But the poem describes them as restless, active, noisy. They disturb Apsu now, we should be careful here. Ancient myth does not work like a modern novel where every character has a detailed psychological profile. The poem does not pause to tell us exactly what Apsu is feeling in a modern emotional sense. But the point is clear enough. The old order is being disrupted by the new generation. The younger gods are not quiet. They do not stay in their assigned place. They are making the cosmos more complicated, and Apsu cannot tolerate it. This is the first warning that the primordial waters are not peaceful paradise. The beginning of the world is unstable. Creation is already producing tension. The more gods are born, the less room there seems to be for the older powers that came first. It is almost like the universe is overcrowding before it has even been built. Imagine being the first generation. You existed before there was sky, earth, or time, as anyone understands it. Then your descendants begin appearing around you. They make noise. They change the balance. They introduce movement, ambition, and unpredictability into a reality that had once been still. Apsu looks at these younger gods and sees a problem. And beside him is Mummu, a figure associated with Apsu and sometimes understood as his vizier or counselor. The exact meaning and role of Mummu have been debated by scholars, because ancient texts do not always map neatly onto modern categories. But in the story, Mummu helps move Apsu toward a catastrophic decision. Apsu decides the younger gods must be destroyed, not punished, not sent away, destroyed. That is the first divine crisis. And notice how strange the logic is. The gods who will eventually make the ordered world are themselves born out of disorder. The beings who will organize the cosmos are first viewed as an intolerable disturbance. The future guardians of civilization begin as noisy children in the waters before creation. This is where the Enuma Elish starts building its central tension. The world does not come into existence through a smooth, peaceful unfolding. It emerges through conflict between generations. The old powers fear replacement. The younger powers refuse to disappear, and hidden among those younger gods is Ea, the brilliant and dangerous god of wisdom. Apsu thinks he is about to silence the next generation forever. But the next generation has already learned how to fight back. Apsu's plan was simple and horrifying. The younger gods had become too loud, too active, too impossible to control. In the poem, their movement disturbs the primordial waters. They churn around inside the old cosmic order. They make noise where there had once been silence. Apsu cannot sleep. That detail matters. This is not yet a war over land, cities, kingship, or human beings. None of those things exist. It is a conflict over rest itself. The first god of fresh water, the ancient source beneath the ground, wants quiet. The younger generation represents motion, change, and a future that Apsu no longer recognizes. So he turns to Mummu. Mummu is one of the more mysterious figures in the Enuma Elish. In many translations, he is Apsu's minister, advisor, or attendant. His name may have associations with skill, form, or creative power, although scholars still debate exactly how to understand it. What matters in the story is that Mummu does not calm Apsu down. He encourages him. Apsu tells Mummu that he cannot bear the god's behaviour any longer. Their noise has become unbearable. Their activity has destroyed his peace. And Mummu gives him the answer he wants to hear. Destroy them. Wipe out the younger gods before they grow even stronger. Think about what that means. The first crisis in the universe is not an invasion from outside. There is no outside yet. It is not a battle between gods and demons. It is a father deciding that his children have become too disruptive to live. The old generation is trying to stop the future from happening. And at first, Tiamat does not agree. This is important, because later retellings often make it sound as if Apsu and Tiamat are always united against the younger gods. But in the opening crisis, they are not. Tiamat rebukes Apsu. These are her children too. She questions why he would destroy what they brought into existence. The text does not turn her into a peaceful modern mother figure. That would be too simple. But at this moment she resists the idea of annihilating the younger gods. Apsu's anger is his own. Mummu's advice strengthens it. And somewhere in the divine family the plot becomes known. This is where Ea enters the story. Ea, whose Sumerian name is Enki, is not simply another member of the younger generation. He is the god of wisdom, of magic, of cunning intelligence, of the freshwater deep that Mesopotamians imagined beneath the earth. The same waters that Apsu embodies on a primordial level become, in Ea's hands, a source of knowledge, power, and technical mastery. If Apsu represents ancient, undivided freshwater existence, Ea represents the ability to understand it, to use it, to control forces other gods only fear. When Ea learns of Apsu's plan, he does not panic, he does not gather an army. He does not challenge Apsu to a loud and glorious battle in the way Marduk will later confront Tiamat. Ea does something more dangerous, he thinks. The poem says that Ea is the wisest and most capable among the gods. He hears the plot, considers it carefully, and develops a magical response. This is the first major victory in the Enuma Elish, and it is not won by brute strength. It is won by knowledge. Ea prepares a spell. Ancient Mesopotamian religion took words seriously. Incantations, divine names, ritual formulas, and sacred knowledge were not merely symbolic expressions. They were understood as forces that could act upon reality. To know the right words was to possess a kind of power. A priest, exorcist, healer, or god who understood the hidden structure of things could impose order where others saw danger. Ea has that power. He casts his spell over Apsu, and the oldest freshwater god falls asleep. Not ordinary sleep, not rest after exhaustion. A magical sleep imposed by a younger god who has turned intelligence into a weapon. The figure who wanted silence is silenced. The god who could not sleep because of the younger generation is forced into sleep by the cleverest of them. Then Ea acts. He removes Apsu's crown. He strips away his radiance. He takes the symbols of his authority, and he kills him. It happens with shocking speed. Apsu had imagined eliminating the younger gods before they could become a threat. Instead, the first great threat is eliminated by the very generation he wanted to erase. Mummu is defeated too. Ea binds him, restrains him, and takes away his power. In some translations, Mummu is held captive by a nose rope, a humiliating image for a figure who had helped encourage Apsu's murderous plan. The advisor who urged destruction ends up powerless, captured and silenced alongside his master. And just like that, the balance of divine power changes. The ancient order has been broken. Apsu is dead. That is an extraordinary claim for a creation story. In many religious traditions, the primordial source remains above everything else, permanent and untouchable. But the Enuma Elish gives us something different. The first generation can be overcome. The older power can be killed. Authority is not guaranteed by being first. It has to be defended or seized. Ea now establishes his dwelling on Apsu's remains. The conqueror does not merely destroy the old freshwater god. He takes possession of his domain. The Apsu becomes a place, a sacred deep, and eventually a central feature of Mesopotamian temple imagination. Babylonian temples could include a water basin called an Apsu, representing the holy freshwater realm beneath the earth. That does not mean every temple basin was understood as a literal copy of this myth in a simple one-to-one way. Ancient religious symbols accumulate meanings over centuries. But the connection is clear enough. Ea's victory transforms Apsu from a primordial being into a conquered cosmic foundation. The defeated source becomes the base of a new order. And inside this newly claimed realm, Ea and Damkina have a son. His name is Marduk. At first, this may sound like just another divine birth. The poem has already introduced generations of gods. One more child should not change much, but this child is different. The Enuma Elish lingers over him. Marduk is described as extraordinary from the beginning. His form is magnificent. His power is immense. He has abilities that exceed those of ordinary gods. Some translations describe him as having 4 eyes and 4 ears, features that suggest perception beyond normal limits. He sees more, he hears more, he speaks, and divine fire or force moves with his words. This is not subtle. The poem is announcing the arrival of someone who will matter more than anyone else. Marduk is born after Ea's victory in the territory won from Apsu. His existence is made possible by a transfer of power from the old generation to the new. That is why his birth is not just a family event. It is political, cosmic, dangerous. Ea has already shown that wisdom can overthrow age. Marduk will soon show that power can reorganize the universe itself. But Apsu's death does not bring peace. It creates a new wound in the divine family. Because Tiamat has lost her partner, the old balance of the primordial waters has been shattered. And although she did not support Apsu's original plan, she cannot simply ignore what Ea has done. The younger gods have survived. They have won their first victory. And now they have produced a god whose rise will reshape heaven, earth, kingship, and the fate of humanity. The creation war has not begun yet, but the first blood has already been spilled. Marduk is not introduced quietly. The poem slows down for him. After the swift violence against Apsu, after Ea takes control of the conquered deep and establishes his dwelling there, the Enuma Elish gives us a new kind of scene. Not another plot, not another assassination, a birth. But this is a birth surrounded by divine recognition. Ea looks upon his son and sees something extraordinary. Damkina, Marduk's mother, gives birth in the sacred Apsu, the very realm taken from the defeated primordial god. That setting matters. Marduk is born inside a victory. He enters the world already standing on the foundation of the old order that Ea has overthrown. And the gods praise him. His grandfather Anu, the great sky god, is especially important here. Anu sees Marduk and delights in him. The poem describes Marduk's body in language that is almost overwhelming. He is radiant, magnificent, powerful beyond comparison. He is not merely a promising young god. He is presented as a being whose presence makes normal divine categories start to look too small. Some translations say he has 4 eyes and 4 ears. That can sound strange to modern readers, maybe even monstrous. But in the ancient context, these features are not signs of deformity. They are signs of expanded power. Marduk sees in every direction. He hears what other gods cannot hear. Nothing escapes his attention. Where an ordinary god may perceive one danger at a time, Marduk is built to perceive the whole field. He is awareness multiplied, and then there is his mouth. When Marduk speaks, fire flashes from his lips. Again, we should not imagine this as a biological detail, as if the poem is trying to describe a creature in a literal physical sense. This is divine poetry. Fire is radiance. Fire is authority. Fire is destructive force. His speech does not merely communicate an idea. His speech acts. That is one of the deepest themes running through Mesopotamian religion. Words have power. Names have power. Incantations have power. Ea defeated Apsu because he knew how to use sacred knowledge. But Marduk's power is described on an even larger scale. He does not just know the right words, his very voice carries force. And Anu decides to test what this young god can do. According to the poem, Anu creates the four winds and gives them to Marduk as toys. Think about that image for a second. The winds are not gentle breezes. In ancient Mesopotamia, wind could mean relief from crushing heat, but it could also mean storm, dust, destruction, and sudden chaos. A violent wind could flatten crops, whip canals into dangerous waves, tear at roofs made of reed and mud brick, and turn the open plain into a wall of dust. And Anu gives these forces to Marduk like playthings. Marduk releases them. The winds race in every direction. They disturb the waters, they churn Tiamat's body. They make the primal sea restless. The cosmic mother who had once resisted Apsu's plan now finds herself unable to rest. Notice what has happened. Apsu could not sleep because the younger gods were too noisy. Now Tiamat cannot remain at peace because Marduk's winds have become too powerful. The pattern is repeating, but it is repeating at a higher level. The earlier crisis began with activity inside the primordial waters. Marduk's appearance turns that activity into something far more dangerous. The younger gods are no longer simply loud children disturbing their parents. They now possess a god whose power can shake the original sea itself. And this wind imagery is doing more than building suspense. For Babylonian audiences, wind was connected to kingship and military force. A king could be described as a storm sweeping over his enemies. Armies moved like floods. Divine wrath could arrive like a gale across the plain. Marduk's winds announce that he is not only wise like Ea or majestic like Anu. He is a god of command, movement, and irresistible pressure. He can send forces outward. He can make the stable unstable. He can turn the atmosphere itself into a weapon. Later in the epic, this becomes crucial. Marduk will use winds in his battle against Tiamat. They are part of his arsenal, but even here, before the open war begins, the poem is preparing us. The winds are a preview of what kind of god he is. He does not wait for chaos to come to him. He reaches into chaos and makes it move. Now, this may sound like the Enuma Elish is simply telling us that Marduk was always the greatest god in Mesopotamia. But historically, it is more complicated than that. Mesopotamian religion was never one fixed system with one unchanging list of gods at the top. It developed across thousands of years, across many cities, kingdoms, languages, and political transformations. Sumerian city-states honoured local patron deities. Akkadian rulers elevated gods connected to their own traditions. Assyrian theology often gave special prominence to Ashur. In other places and periods, Enlil, Anu, Ea, Ishtar, Shamash, Sin, and countless other gods could hold central roles. Marduk was not always the unquestioned supreme figure. His rise is closely tied to Babylon, as Babylon became more important politically, especially during the Old Babylonian period, and later under Babylonian imperial power. Marduk's theological status rose with it. The Enuma Elish reflects that rise. It does not erase the older gods. In fact, the poem depends on them. Anu gives Marduk authority. Ea is his father and source of wisdom. The assembly of gods will later grant him kingship. But the epic rearranges the hierarchy. It takes older divine powers and gathers them around Marduk. This is what makes the poem more than a story about cosmic monsters. It is also a statement about Babylonian ideology. If Marduk is king of the gods, then Babylon, his city, can be imagined as the center of a properly ordered world. Political power, temple ritual, cosmic order, and divine hierarchy all begin to reinforce one another. That does not mean every Babylonian experienced this theology in exactly the same way. Ancient religion was never as uniform as royal inscriptions or ceremonial texts can make it seem. Families had household gods, cities preserved local cults, priests served many divine powers, ordinary people prayed for health, children, harvests, protection, justice, and relief from illness, often addressing whichever god seemed most relevant. But in the Enuma Elish, Marduk is being elevated above this crowded and ancient pantheon. He is not replacing every god in a simple sense. He is becoming the god through whom their powers can be organized. That is a bold claim, and it is exactly why his growing strength becomes a problem. Because Tiamat is still there. She has watched Apsu die. She has watched Ea claim the old freshwater realm. Now she hears the winds, she feels the waters moving around her, and around her other gods begin to complain. Some are disturbed by the chaos. Some fear what Marduk is becoming. Some may see the younger generations rise as a threat to the order they once knew. The poem does not give us a modern psychological portrait of Tiamat. We cannot simply say she is grieving, jealous, or evil. Those words are too easy. Tiamat is a primordial force, a divine mother, and soon, in the logic of the epic, the centre of resistance against the new order. Marduk has not attacked her yet, but his power has already reached her. The winds are blowing, the waters are churning, and the god born in Ea's conquered domain is becoming impossible for the older powers to ignore. That is when the complaints begin. And Tiamat will have to decide whether to endure the rise of Marduk or make war against it. Tiamat chooses war, but the poem does not present that choice as happening in a vacuum. Around her, the divine world is divided. Apsu is dead. Ea has taken possession of his domain. Marduk has appeared with powers that seem to exceed anything the older gods expected. And the winds he releases have disturbed Tiamat's waters until even the gods within her circle can no longer pretend that nothing has changed. Some of them come to her and begin to speak. They remind her of Apsu. They remind her that she once stood beside him. They tell her that the younger gods destroyed her partner and now threaten her peace. They complain about Marduk's winds, about the turbulence, about the rising power of Ei's family. In the poem's logic, they are pushing Tiamat toward a decision she had resisted, and eventually she accepts their argument. She will not simply mourn Apsu. She will answer his death with force. This is the moment where the Enuma Elish changes from a story of divine conflict into a war story, because Tiamat does not gather a normal army. She creates terror. The text describes a host of frightening composite beings, creatures assembled from features that do not normally belong together. Serpents with terrible venom, dragons, storm demons, lion-bodied monsters, scorpion men, fish men, bull men, creatures with claws, horns, fangs, scales, and bodies that seem built out of the most dangerous parts of the natural world. Different translations render their names differently, and scholars still debate the precise form of some of these beings. Ancient Mesopotamian monster terminology is not always easy to pin down, but the overall picture is clear. Tiamat is making an army from the raw materials of fear. Imagine what these creatures would have meant to people living in ancient Mesopotamia. A snake was not just a snake. It could strike from under stones, from cracks in walls, from tall grass near the canal. A scorpion was small, but its sting could bring agony. Lions were real predators. Bulls represented enormous physical force. Storms could destroy homes, sink boats, ruin crops, and turn a stable landscape into chaos in a single afternoon. Tiamat's army combines all of it, every dangerous thing in the world, magnified. And more than magnified. Reorganized, that is important. Tiamat is not merely unleashing random chaos. She is building a military force. The poem says she gives these creatures fearsome powers. She arms them. She makes them terrifying to behold. Their bodies themselves become weapons. Anyone who looks at them is supposed to be overcome with dread. This is not chaos without direction. This is chaos trained for war. And then Tiamat makes her most consequential decision. She chooses Kingu. Kingu is not one of the famous old gods like Anu, Ea, or Enlil. Before this point, he has not been the centre of the story. But Tiamat raises him above the others. She makes him her partner, and she appoints him as commander of her forces. The language is political as much as it is personal. Tiamat gives Kingu a position. She places him at the head of the army. She elevates him in the divine assembly. In some translations, she tells him that his command is supreme. The gods are to obey his word. His authority is no longer just personal strength. It is recognized rule, and to make that rule real, Tiamat gives him the Tablet of Destinies. This is one of the most important objects in the entire epic. The Tablet of Destinies is not a tablet in the ordinary modern sense, like a written document that somebody reads and files away. In Mesopotamian thought, destiny was not simply the future waiting somewhere ahead of you. Destiny could be decreed, it could be assigned, it could be fixed through divine authority. To possess the Tablet of Destinies was to possess the right to establish decrees that the cosmos had to obey. Think of it as the ultimate seal of office, not just a crown, not just a weapon, not just a throne, a cosmic authorization. Whoever holds it has the authority to determine ranks, commands, outcomes, and proper order among the gods. The tablet represents the power to say, this is how things will be, and have reality itself recognize the decree. That is why giving it to Kingu changes everything. Tiamat is not only preparing to destroy Marduk, she is appointing an alternative ruler of the divine world. Kingu is not simply her strongest monster or most loyal ally. He becomes the bearer of legitimate authority, at least from her side of the conflict. The war is now about kingship. Who has the right to rule? Ea has killed Apsu. Marduk is rising. The younger gods are gathering power around themselves. But Tiamat answers by creating a rival command structure. She gives Kingu an army. She gives him rank, and she gives him the Tablet of Destinies. In other words, she gives him the authority that Marduk will later claim for himself. Now, this is where we have to slow down, because the Enuma Elish is not an impartial account. It is Babylonian religious literature. It is a poem that celebrates Marduk's elevation. It was recited in Babylon in a ritual setting connected with the city's great New Year festival. Its narrative is designed to bring Marduk to the top of the divine hierarchy. So when Tiamat gathers monsters and appoints Kingu, the poem wants us to see this as a dangerous rebellion against rightful order. But that is the poem's perspective. From another angle, Tiamat can also be seen as the older primordial power resisting a younger generation that has already killed her partner and seized control of part of the original world. She is called monstrous because the story needs Marduk's victory to look necessary. Her army is described as unnatural because the new order must defeat an old order portrayed as threatening. That does not make Tiamat harmless. The poem makes her terrifying on purpose. Her forces are meant to overwhelm the gods, but it does mean we should notice the political logic underneath the monsters. Marduk's Babylonian cult is making a claim. Real authority cannot rest with Tiamat. It cannot rest with Kingu. It must pass to Marduk, and the stakes could not be higher. If Kingu keeps the Tablet of Destinies, then Tiamat's side controls the structure of divine rule. Marduk may be powerful, but power without recognized authority is not kingship. He must defeat not only Tiamat's body, not only her army, but her claim to govern the cosmos. The older gods see what is coming. They look at Tiamat's forces, and they are afraid. Very afraid. The monsters are assembled. Kingu holds the Tablet of Destinies against his chest. Tiamat has made war inevitable, and now the gods need someone willing to face her. The gods need someone willing to face her. That sounds simple. It is not, because Tiamat is not just another rival in the divine family. She is one of the primordial powers from which that family emerged. She is the deep salt water, the vastness before boundaries, the mother of many of the gods now gathered in fear. And she has an army, not an army that can be reasoned with, bribed, or easily outmaneuvered. Kingu holds the Tablet of Destinies. Tiamat's monsters stand ready. The entire structure of divine authority is suddenly in question. So the gods do what frightened governments, frightened cities, and frightened ruling classes have often done throughout history. They hold a meeting. In the Enuma Elish, the divine assembly is not a decorative detail. It is where power becomes legitimate. A god may be strong. A god may be ancient. A god may even possess terrifying magical abilities. But ruling requires recognition. It requires the other gods to agree, or at least to accept, that one voice now speaks for all of them. But before that agreement can happen, the older gods have to confront an uncomfortable fact. None of them wants to fight Tiamat. Anshar, one of the senior gods, is horrified when he learns that Tiamat has appointed Kingu and given him the Tablet of Destinies. The poem says, his face grows dark. He is troubled. He is shaken. And remember, this is not an ordinary military crisis. The gods are facing the power that existed before their ordered world did. Tiamat's waters are older than their palaces, their temples, their ranks, and their laws. Her monsters are the physical expression of a world without stable limits. A world where categories break down, where a lion can have the body of a man, where storms become weapons, where poison, claws, scales, and darkness all march under one command. Anshar first turns to Anu. Anu is not a minor god. In Mesopotamian religion, he is a great sky god, an ancient figure of enormous prestige. If anyone should be able to stand before Tiamat, surely it is Anu. So Anshar sends him. Go before Tiamat, he says in effect. Speak to her. Calm her rage if you can. Stop this before the war consumes them all. Anu goes. But when he sees Tiamat's force, when he confronts the reality of what she has assembled, he cannot do it. The poem is blunt about this. Anu turns back. He comes home unable to face her. That moment matters because it strips away any easy assumption that age and rank are enough. Anu has status. He has authority. He has a name that carries weight. But status is not the same thing as the ability to act when the world is coming apart. Then Ea is considered, Ea, also called Enki in Sumerian tradition, has already proven himself dangerous. He outwitted Apsu. He used magic, intelligence, and decisive force to destroy the first threat against the younger gods. If anybody has earned a reputation for solving impossible problems, it is Ea. But even Ea does not step forward as the answer. The exact sequence is preserved in an ancient poem, copied and recopied across centuries, and small details can vary between translations. But the central point is clear. The great gods hesitate. The gods who should be able to act cannot bring themselves to confront Tiamat directly. And that is when Marduk enters the conversation. He is younger. He is powerful. And unlike the older gods, he does not simply offer help. He makes a bargain. Marduk speaks to Ea, his father, and then to the assembly. He says he will face Tiamat, he will go to war, he will risk everything against the ancient mother of the gods and the monstrous army she has created. But if he wins, things cannot go back to normal. That is the condition. If Marduk defeats Tiamat, he says, then his word must become supreme. His decree must not be altered. When he speaks, the other gods must accept it. He must be given the authority to determine destinies. In other words, Marduk is not asking for a medal after the battle. He is asking for kingship. This is one of the most revealing moments in the entire Enuma Elish. Marduk does not say, "Let me prove I am strong." He says, "If I save you, I rule." And the other gods agree. They gather in assembly, they feast, they drink, they deliberate. Modern readers might find the banquet strange in the middle of an existential crisis, but in ancient Mesopotamian political and religious life, shared food and drink could mark alliance, agreement, and the binding of a collective decision. This is not just celebration, it is ratification. The gods are about to delegate their authority to Marduk. That is a political act. Ancient Mesopotamia was a world of cities, kings, councils, temples, competing claims, and fragile systems of loyalty. Power had to be recognized. A ruler did not merely possess strength, he had to establish that his command carried legitimate force. The Enuma Elish projects that political reality into the heavens. Marduk's kingship is not presented as a private ambition alone. It is authorized by consensus. The gods are frightened, divided, and vulnerable. They need coordination. They need one command, so they make Marduk the center of their united response. But they do not take his power on faith. They test him. The scene is one of the strangest and most important in the poem. The gods place a garment before Marduk. In some translations, it is simply called a robe. In others, the language can feel more cosmic, as if the object is a small model of ordered appearance itself, something visible that can be made present or absent by command. Then they tell him to speak. Command the garment to disappear. Marduk speaks, and the garment vanishes. Then they tell him to command it back. Marduk speaks again, and it returns. Think about what this means. Marduk is not demonstrating brute force. He is not lifting a mountain or smashing a weapon. He is showing that his word changes reality. His speech has effect. His command does not describe what will happen. It makes it happen. That is exactly the kind of authority the Tablet of Destinies represents. Kingu holds the tablet because Tiamat has granted him the power to decree order. But Marduk's test suggests he possesses something even more fundamental. He can speak absence into being. He can restore what has vanished. He has command over the basic stability of the visible world. For the gods this settles the question. They proclaim him king. They give him weapons, a bow, a mace, lightning nets. The winds themselves, but the weapons are only part of the transformation. The more important gift is authority. Marduk now carries the mandate of the assembly. He goes to war not merely as Ea's gifted son, not merely as a powerful younger god, but as the chosen representative of the divine order. And that changes the coming battle completely. This will not be Tiamat versus Marduk in the narrow sense. Not one angry figure against another. It is primordial disorder against an alliance that has chosen order. It is inherited authority against delegated kingship. It is Tiamat's claim that the old powers can appoint Kingu and rule through fear, against Marduk's claim that a new ruler can organize the gods, command the winds, and make his word binding across the cosmos. The gods have chosen their champion. Now Marduk has to prove that their choice was not a desperate mistake. Marduk does not walk into this confrontation carrying one sword and a little confidence. He prepares like a god about to fight the raw, violent forces that existed before the world had shape. The poem gives him a bow, a weapon associated with precision and deadly purpose. It gives him a mace. It gives him lightning, flashing before him like a visible declaration of his power. He takes up a net, because Tiamat cannot simply be struck. She has to be caught, contained, bound inside a limit. And then there are the winds. This is where the story becomes much stranger than a simple duel between two divine warriors. Marduk summons the winds from every direction. The four winds. The winds that drive storms, churn seas, scatter clouds, and erase tracks across the desert. He adds other terrible winds to them, forces named in the poem as if the atmosphere itself has been turned into an army under his command. He stations them around Tiamat. No escape, no retreat into the endless waters from which she emerged. Then Marduk climbs into his chariot. It is not an ordinary vehicle. The poem calls it a storm chariot, drawn by fearsome creatures and fitted for war. Its wheels move toward the primordial sea. Its driver is Marduk himself, the newly chosen king of the gods, carrying the authority the divine assembly has placed in his hands. Picture what that means in Mesopotamian terms. The people who lived between the Tigris and Euphrates, water could mean survival. It brought crops, fish, travel, and life. But water could also mean catastrophe. Rivers flooded, storms destroyed fields, canals failed. Entire cities depended on controlling water that could never be fully controlled. Tiamat is not just a villain standing on a battlefield. She is the dangerous, boundless water before boundaries. The deep that cannot be planted, measured, taxed, or turned into a canal. And Marduk approaches her carrying weapons of order. Net, bow, chariot, wind, command. When Tiamat sees him coming, the poem says she is disturbed. That detail is important. She is terrifying. She has created monsters. She has given Kingu the tablet of destinies. She represents a primordial power older than Marduk's throne. But Marduk is not intimidated in the way Anu and Ea had been. He comes directly toward her, and the confrontation becomes unavoidable. They speak before they fight. That is another ancient detail worth noticing. This is not mindless violence. Both sides make claims. Both sides accuse. Marduk denounces Tiamat for raising an army and appointing Kingu to authority. Tiamat answers in rage. The words are difficult to reconstruct in every detail because the surviving tablets are ancient, damaged, and translated in slightly different ways. But the meaning is clear enough. There will be no settlement. There will be no return to the earlier divine family. The old order has broken beyond repair. Then Tiamat opens her mouth, and Marduk releases the wind. Not just any wind, the evil wind, sometimes translated as the destructive wind or the Imhulu wind, rushes into her open mouth before she can close it. Tiamat cannot contain it. The force fills her body, distends her, overwhelms her from within. This is the decisive moment of the battle. Marduk does not defeat Tiamat simply because he is stronger in a modern superhero sense. He defeats her because he controls the forces that limit and disrupt her elemental power. Tiamat is the sea. Marduk weaponizes the storm against the sea. He uses the wind to stop the waters from closing over him. He uses the net to hold what cannot be allowed to flow away. He uses the arrow only after Tiamat has been trapped and overpowered. Then he fires. The arrow strikes Tiamat, and her resistance ends. For ancient audiences, this was not necessarily a scene of entertainment in the way we think of a fantasy battle now. It was an explanation for why the world is stable at all. Why there are boundaries between sea and land. Why the sky does not collapse into the earth. Why the dangerous waters can be pushed back, channeled and held at the edges of the inhabited world. Order in this story is not natural. Order is won, and it is won violently. Once Tiamat falls, her army collapses. The monsters she created, the hybrid creatures built for war, lose their courage. The gods who had sided with her attempt to flee, but Marduk's net is already around them. The same image that captured Tiamat now closes around her allies. They are bound. They are disarmed. Their rebellion is over before it can become a second war. Kingu is among them. He had been elevated above the others. Tiamat had chosen him as her consort and commander. She had placed the Tablet of Destinies on his chest, making him the holder of supreme authority in her new order. But that authority proves fragile. The Tablet of Destinies is taken from Kingu and given to Marduk. That transfer is one of the most important acts in the entire Enuma Elish, because the tablet is not merely loot from a defeated enemy. It represents the power to establish destinies, to make decrees binding, to say what place each god will hold in the cosmic hierarchy. Kingu had been granted that role by Tiamat. Marduk now takes it by conquest. And then, according to the poem, he seals it. He fastens the Tablet of Destinies to his own breast. The image is deliberate. The authority that once hung on Kingu's body now belongs to Marduk. The gods had proclaimed him king before the battle. Now the victory has made that kingship real. The champion has become ruler. But look at the sequence carefully. First, there is no ordered universe. Then there is conflict. Then there is a political crisis among the gods. Then a king is chosen. Then the king defeats the primordial deep. Only after all of that can creation begin. This is the central paradox of the Enuma Elish. The world is not spoken peacefully into existence from nothing. The world emerges after a war. Before there can be a sky, there must be a defeated sea. Before there can be stable land, there must be boundaries imposed on what had no boundaries. Before the gods can receive their proper places, one god must seize the authority to assign those places. Marduk has won. Tiamat is defeated. Kingu's Tablet of Destinies is in his possession. The monsters abound. The rebel gods are subdued, and the old primordial order has been broken. But the cosmos still has not been made. The battlefield is now the material from which Marduk will build it. Marduk stands over Tiamat's body, and this is where the Enuma Elish makes its most shocking claim. The universe is not built from neutral material. It is built from the defeated body of the primordial sea. The poem says Marduk looks at Tiamat and considers what to do with her. That pause matters. The battle is over, but victory is not enough. A defeated enemy does not automatically become a world. Marduk has to impose a plan on the remains of chaos. Then he splits her. The language is brutal and strangely practical. In many translations, Marduk divides Tiamat like a shellfish, separating her body into two great portions. One half he raises upward and stretches out above him. This becomes the sky, not the empty blue sky as we imagine it today. In ancient Mesopotamian thought, the sky was a real structure, a vast barrier, a solid boundary holding back the waters above the world. Marduk sets Tiamat's upper half in place, secures it, and posts guards so the waters cannot escape. Think about the problem this solves. Before Marduk's victory, Tiamat is boundless water. Water without an edge, water before land, before cities, before fields, before canals, before the fragile human idea that anything can stay where it belongs. But now that water has been restrained. It is held above the world. The heavens become a kind of cosmic dam, and that image would have made immediate sense to people living in Mesopotamia. Their world depended on managing water. Too little water, and crops failed. Too much water, and rivers could destroy homes, fields, temples, entire neighborhoods. Civilization itself meant digging canals, repairing embankments, measuring flood levels, and constantly preventing life-giving water from becoming deadly water. So when Marduk places a barrier over Tiamat's waters, he is doing on a cosmic scale what kings, farmers, and laborers struggled to do on Earth. He is making the world habitable by making boundaries hold. The lower portion of Tiamat's body becomes the foundation of the ordered world below. The exact details can vary depending on the translation and on how scholars reconstruct damaged lines, but the overall picture is clear. Marduk takes what had been a single, undivided expanse and turns it into separated realms. Above, the sky; below, the earth. Between them, the space where gods, humans, animals, rivers, cities, and seasons can exist. This is creation as construction. Marduk is not merely causing things to appear. He is measuring, dividing, fastening, assigning, and securing. He behaves less like a distant creator and more like the master architect of a city, a builder who knows that walls, gates, channels, and borders are what keep a complex world from falling apart. And he does not stop with sky and earth. Once the great boundaries are established, Marduk begins organizing time itself. The poem describes him setting the stars in their proper places. He establishes constellations often understood as the great celestial figures associated with the gods. He marks out the year. He divides it into months. He gives the heavens a schedule. This was not decorative astronomy. For ancient Mesopotamians, the movement of the sky was one of the most reliable patterns in existence. The stars returned, the moon changed shape and returned. The sun crossed the sky and returned. Seasons shifted, fields needed planting, rivers rose and fell, festivals arrived on appointed days. A calendar was not just a way of counting time. It was a way of proving that time had order. The Enuma Elish says Marduk establishes the year and marks its divisions. Some translations describe him assigning 3 stars to each of the 12 months. Other details are debated, partly because the tablets are damaged and partly because ancient astronomical language does not always map neatly onto modern categories. Are these individual stars, constellations, stellar deities? Seasonal markers? Scholars do not agree on every point. But they agree on the larger idea. Marduk makes the heavens predictable. He takes the sky, which had been the imprisoned half of a slain sea goddess, and turns it into a working system, a system that marks days, months, seasons, and sacred occasions. The universe is no longer just stable in space. It becomes stable in time. Then comes the moon. Marduk appoints the moon god to regulate the month, giving him a pattern of waxing and waning. The moon becomes a visible measure in the night sky, growing toward fullness and then diminishing again. Its phases tell people where they are in the month. Its return tells them that the cycle continues. The sun also receives his place, associated with the daily passage of light and judgment. In some readings of the poem, Marduk establishes gates or routes through which celestial bodies move. Again, the language can be difficult. The surviving text is not a clean blueprint handed down from antiquity. It is a poem preserved on clay tablets, copied across centuries, sometimes broken, sometimes reconstructed from fragments found in different places. That means every translation contains decisions. A damaged sign can have more than one possible reading. A familiar word may carry meanings that do not survive in English. One translator may emphasize an astronomical arrangement. Another may emphasize divine stations and ritual timing. The broad structure of Marduk's creation is secure. The fine details remain open to interpretation, and honestly that uncertainty is part of what makes the Enuma Elish so fascinating. We are not reading a modern textbook explaining a finished system. We are listening through broken tablets to an ancient world trying to explain why the cosmos has limits. Why does the sea stop at the shore? Why does rain fall from above but not drown the world forever? Why does the moon follow a pattern? Why do stars return to their stations? Why can farmers plan for seasons at all? The Babylonian answer is not that these things simply happen. They happen because Marduk defeated the force that had no boundaries and transformed it into boundaries. If you enjoy these ancient mysteries, by the way, you can get our book about the 12 unexplained mysteries through the website. The link is in the description now. It is tempting to treat this as a crude early version of later creation ideas. But that would miss what makes the Enuma Elish distinctive. This cosmos is material in the most literal sense. Its sky comes from Tiamat's body. Its structure is the result of cutting, stretching, sealing, and containing. The world is not separate from the conflict that produced it. The conflict is still built into its architecture. Every boundary between waters and dry land, heaven and earth, chaos and order, is a reminder of Marduk's victory. And that is why boundaries mattered so much. A boundary was never merely a line on a map. It was protection. It was civilization. It was the difference between a field and a floodplain, between a city and the wilderness, between a temple governed by ritual and a world abandoned to uncertainty. To establish a boundary was to make life possible. To cross or destroy one could threaten the entire order of things. Marduk has now done the unthinkable. He has turned the primordial enemy into the walls of reality. But a structured cosmos still needs someone to serve within it. The gods have been freed from Tiamat's threat. Their places are being assigned. And soon a new kind of being will be created to carry the burden of work in this newly ordered world. That being will not come from Tiamat. It will come from Kingu. The new world has a sky. It has earth. It has stars moving on their appointed paths, months marked by the moon, waters held behind barriers, and gods assigned to their stations. But there is still one enormous problem. Who is going to do the work? Because order does not maintain itself. Temples need to be supplied. Offerings need to be prepared. Fields need to be irrigated. Canals need to be cleared of silt. Cities need walls, storehouses, roads, and labourers. Even the divine world in the imagination of ancient Mesopotamia is not free from administration. The gods have won the war, but victory has left them with a functioning universe to run. And running a universe is exhausting. This is one of the most important ideas in the Enuma Elish. Humans are not created simply because the cosmos needs inhabitants. They are created because the gods need relief. Marduk speaks to Ea, the clever god who defeated Apsu at the beginning of the story. He proposes something extraordinary. He will create a new being. A creature made to bear the burden that the gods no longer want to carry. In many translations, Marduk says something like this: he will create humankind, and the work of the gods will be imposed upon them, so that the gods may rest. That is the basic logic. Humans exist so the gods can rest. And at first, that can sound harsh, maybe even humiliating. Are human beings in this story nothing more than workers created for divine convenience? But before we rush to that conclusion, we need to understand what work meant in the world that produced this poem. Mesopotamia was built through labour on an enormous scale. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates could be incredibly fertile, but fertility was never automatic. Water had to be moved, canals had to be dug, dikes had to be repaired after floods. Fields had to be managed against drought, salinity, weeds, and changing river courses. A city could not survive because someone had a good idea. It survived because thousands of people kept showing up to maintain the systems that made urban life possible. Work was not just punishment. Work was what held back chaos. And that is exactly what the gods have just done at the cosmic level. Marduk has contained the waters, fixed the heavens, and established boundaries. Now humanity enters the story as the force that will maintain sacred order on earth. But humanity's origin is not peaceful. Marduk needs material. And the material will come from Kingu. Remember who Kingu was. Tiamat had elevated him above the other gods during the rebellion. She gave him the Tablet of Destinies, the object that carried supreme authority. She made him commander of her army. Kingu did not merely stand beside Tiamat. He accepted the role of her champion, and now he is defeated. The poem says the gods bring Kingu before Ea. They identify him as the one who had instigated the rebellion, the one who had taken command under Tiamat's authority. His guilt is declared, his punishment follows. Kingu is executed. Then Ea takes his blood. From that blood, humanity is made. It is one of the most startling moments in ancient creation literature. Human beings are not formed from pure light, or divine breath, or untouched earth. They come from the blood of a defeated rebel. The enemy of order becomes the substance of the servants of order. Think about how strange that is. Tiamat's body becomes the structure of the cosmos. Her blood, in some readings, is associated with the clouds or the created world's material processes, and Kingu's blood becomes humanity. The defeated side is not simply erased, it is transformed. The old chaos is broken apart, assigned a place, and made useful within Marduk's new system. That does not mean the Babylonians thought human beings were evil by nature in any simple modern sense. The poem does not say that humans are corrupt because Kingu was guilty. It does not develop a doctrine of inherited sin. That is not its concern. Its concern is duty. Humans are made from a being who rebelled against divine order, and they are created to uphold divine order. Their existence is almost a reversal. Kingu helped threaten the structure of the cosmos. Humanity will help sustain it, and the work assigned to humans is not described only as back-breaking labour in a field. It includes service to the gods. In Mesopotamian cities, temples were not merely places people visited once in a while. They were major institutions. They owned land, received offerings, employed workers, stored goods, organized festivals, and stood at the center of civic life. A god's statue in a temple was treated as the god's earthly presence. It had to be fed, clothed, honored, carried in procession, and served through daily ritual. From one perspective, this sounds like humans feeding gods. From another, it is a system of exchange. The gods provide rain, fertility, kingship, protection, and cosmic stability. Humans respond with offerings, labor, praise, and ritual attention. If that relationship is maintained, the world remains ordered. If it breaks down, danger returns. At least that is the ideal world imagined by texts like the Enuma Elish. Real people may have understood it in many different ways. A temple priest in Babylon, a royal scribe, a canal worker, a farmer facing crop failure, and a family making a private offering for a sick child would not necessarily have experienced this grand cosmic system identically. The Enuma Elish gives us a powerful official theological vision. It does not give us direct access to every ancient Mesopotamian mind. Still, the central message is hard to miss. Human life has a function. You are here because the gods made a world that requires care. And in Babylonian thought, care was sacred. Maintaining a canal could be part of maintaining order. Preparing an offering could be part of maintaining order. Supporting the temple, observing festivals, honouring the gods, and recognizing the king's role in the divine system, all of it helped keep civilization in balance. This was not an idea invented only in the Enuma Elish. Other Mesopotamian creation traditions tell a similar story, though the details change. In the Atrahasis epic, the lesser gods grow tired of digging canals and doing agricultural labour for the higher gods. They rebel. To solve the crisis, the gods create humans to take over the work. There too, humanity exists because divine labour has become unbearable. And there too, a god is killed. In Atrahasis, the sacrificed god is often called Waila or Geshtu-A, depending on the text and translation. The gods mix his flesh and blood with clay. From that mixture, humans are formed. The dead god contributes something more than raw material. In some interpretations, he gives humanity intelligence, spirit, or a divine capacity for understanding. That parallel matters across different Mesopotamian traditions. Humans are often made from earth mixed with something divine. Clay gives the body. Divine blood gives life, awareness, or a connection to the world of the gods. But the Enuma Elish gives this older pattern a specifically Babylonian twist. The sacrificed god is Kingu, not a random divine victim. Not simply a god chosen because the ingredients are needed. He is the commander of Tiamat's failed rebellion. His blood carries the memory of the war that came before the world. Humanity is created after order has been won, from the blood of one who fought against that order, and that makes human duty feel even more urgent. The cosmos was not guaranteed. It had to be fought for. The waters had to be contained. The rebellious gods had to be defeated. The heavens had to be fixed in place. Humanity is born into a world that has been stabilized, but never entirely stripped of danger. Floods can still come, drought can still come. Disease, invasion, crop failure, political collapse, all of it can make the ordered world feel suddenly fragile again. So humans work, they build, they offer, they pray. They keep the systems going, not because they are insignificant, but because they occupy a necessary place in the structure Marduk created. And that structure has a centre. If Marduk is the god who brought order to the universe, then the city that honours Marduk can claim a special place within that universe. The next step in the poem is not just about humanity's labour. It is about where the gods will dwell, where their authority will be celebrated, and why Babylon itself is presented as the heart of the ordered world. And that is where the Enuma Elish makes one of its boldest moves. It takes us from the making of the universe to the making of a city. After Marduk defeats Tiamat, establishes the heavens, assigns the gods their places, and creates humanity to carry out the work of divine service, the gods make a decision. They will build Babylon, not just any settlement. Not merely a place where people happen to live beside canals and fields. Babylon will be the earthly counterpart to the ordered cosmos Marduk has created. A city built below in response to the victory won above. The gods speak to Marduk. They praise him for saving them from Tiamat's terrifying army. They recognize that their safety, their offices, even their ability to rest depends on the order he has established. Then they ask for a dwelling place, somewhere they can gather, receive offerings, and celebrate the God who made their world secure. Marduk agrees, and the gods begin construction. They make bricks. They raise Babylon, they build its great sanctuary, Esagila. The name Esagila means something like the house that raises its head, or the house of the lofty head. It was Marduk's great temple complex in Babylon, one of the most important sacred buildings in ancient Mesopotamia. In the imagination of the poem, this is not just a temple among other temples. It is the divine headquarters of the new universe. Think about what the epic is doing. A cosmic war has just been fought in primordial waters before heaven and earth existed. The universe has been constructed from the body of a defeated chaos monster. The stars have been fixed in their courses. Humanity has been created to perform the labour of sacred order. And now, after all that vastness, the story arrives at a real place. A city people could enter, a temple people could see, a sanctuary where priests presented food and drink offerings, where kings came to pray, where festivals gathered enormous crowds, where Marduk's statue stood as the god's presence among his people. The universe has a centre, and according to the Enuma Elish, that centre is Babylon. This is why the poem is much more than a distant myth about things that happened before time began. It is also a charter for a city and its temple. A charter in this sense is a story that explains why an institution matters, why it has authority, why people should recognize its place in the world. Babylon is not important simply because it is wealthy, powerful, or ancient. It is important because Marduk chose it, or, more precisely, because the poem presents Babylon as the place the gods themselves built in honour of Marduk's victory. That gives the city an extraordinary claim. If Marduk is king of the gods, Babylon is the city of the king of the gods. If Esagila is Marduk's dwelling, then Esagila becomes a meeting place for the divine assembly itself. The gods gather there, they hold a feast, they celebrate Marduk, they acknowledge his authority, and they depend on the system he has made. That dependence matters. Before Marduk's victory, the gods are frightened, divided, and vulnerable. Apsu threatens them. Tiamat nearly destroys them. Even the older gods cannot solve the crisis on their own. Marduk can. He creates boundaries where there were none. He turns chaos into structure. He assigns the gods their roles, and by doing so gives them a stable existence inside a stable world. So when they gather in Babylon, they are not merely attending a celebration. They are recognizing the source of their own security. The city becomes a map of cosmic order. Its temple is not just a building. It is a point where heaven and earth connect. Its rituals are not just ceremonies. They are part of the ongoing maintenance of the world Marduk established. Its king, priests, workers and citizens all exist within that sacred arrangement. This is a massive claim for one city, but Babylon did not always dominate Mesopotamia. For long stretches of history, other cities held greater political power. Ur, Uruk, Nippur, Ashur, and many others had ancient prestige, powerful temples, and deep religious traditions. Babylon itself began as a relatively modest city. Its rise was gradual, uneven, and shaped by conquest, trade, administration, and the shifting fortunes of kings. Marduk's rise followed a similar path. He was not always the unquestioned head of the Mesopotamian pantheon. Earlier traditions often gave that kind of seniority to gods, such as Enlil, the great lord associated with authority, kingship, and command, or to older divine figures connected to the great cult centres of southern Mesopotamia. But as Babylon became more important politically, Marduk became more important theologically. That does not mean somebody simply sat down and invented the Enuma Elish as a crude advertisement for Babylonian power. Ancient religious texts are rarely that simple. The poem draws on much older Mesopotamian ideas: primordial waters, divine generations, the creation of humans for work, the dangerous power of the deep, the assembly of the gods. But it reshapes those older materials around Marduk, and through Marduk around Babylon. This is theology, urban identity, royal power, ritual tradition, and inherited myth all woven together. The poem does not just say Babylon is powerful, it imagines a universe in which Babylon's sacred centrality makes sense. That is a more ambitious thing to say. The question is when this version of the story took shape. And here the evidence gets complicated. The Enuma Elish survives in copies from different periods, including tablets found in the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, centuries after the poem was likely composed. But the date of the poem's original composition remains debated. Many scholars connect it to Babylon's rise under the First Dynasty, perhaps during or after the reign of Hammurabi in the 18th century BCE. Others argue that the text, at least in the form we know it, may reflect later developments in Babylonian religion and politics. The problem is that texts have histories. A poem can preserve old myths while giving them new emphasis. It can be copied for centuries, revised, performed, interpreted, and used in rituals long after its earliest form was written down. The tablets we possess are not necessarily the moment the story was born. What is widely clear is that by the first millennium BCE, the Enuma Elish had become deeply connected to Babylon's great New Year festival, the Akitu. During that festival, Marduk's supremacy was publicly affirmed. The city's sacred order, the king's role, and the renewal of the cosmos were bound together in ritual. And that tells us why Babylon matters so much in this poem. The city is not presented as a random human achievement standing beneath an indifferent sky. It is presented as the place where cosmic order comes home. After the war before creation, Marduk does not leave the universe empty. He gives it a capital. But Babylon is not the final word. The city has been built. Esagila stands. The gods have gathered in the temple of the god who saved them. And now comes the final act of the Enuma Elish. Not another battle. Not another monster rising from the deep. A naming ceremony. The gods give Marduk 50 names. At first, that might sound almost anticlimactic. He has already killed Tiamat. He has split her body apart and made the heavens and earth. He has fixed the stars, organized time, assigned divine offices, created humanity, and received Babylon as his sacred city. What is left to do? Everything, according to the poem. Because defeating Tiamat proved Marduk's strength. But the 50 names explain what that strength means. They turn a victorious warrior into something far larger, guardian of the gods, organizer of the cosmos, judge, provider, wise ruler, creator, protector, and master of divine destiny. The battle gave Marduk power. The names give that power meaning. In ancient Mesopotamia, a name was not just a label. It was not merely what you called someone so they would turn around in a crowded room. A divine name could reveal character, authority, function, and rank. It could tell you what a god does in the world, what sphere of reality belongs to that god, what kind of help worshippers might seek, and why the other gods should obey. To name Marduk was to define him, and more than that, it was to recognize him publicly. Think about the difference between someone winning a fight and someone being crowned king. The fight proves they are dangerous. The crown tells everyone else that the new order is official. That is what happens here. The gods do not simply say, "Good job, Marduk. Thanks for defeating the sea dragon." They declare again and again that he is supreme. One name after another, one title after another, one aspect of divine authority after another. The poem calls him Azaluhi, a name associated with power over incantations and ritual purification. That matters because Marduk is not only a god who destroys chaos with weapons. He is also connected to wisdom, healing, and the sacred knowledge needed to drive away danger. He is called Tutu, a name the poem links with restoration, protection, and the renewal of the gods. He is praised as the one who can make what is damaged whole again. He is called Namtilaku, associated with giving life. He is called Asare, a figure of authority and divine order. And perhaps most importantly, he receives the title Bel. Bel simply means Lord, a small word carrying an enormous claim. Not Lord of one city, not Lord of one temple, Lord. In later Mesopotamian usage, Bel could become almost a standard way of referring to Marduk, as if his supremacy had become so complete that the Lord was enough. The 50 names do not all describe separate personalities in the modern sense. They are titles, inherited divine identities, theological claims, and concentrated statements of power. Some likely preserve connections to older Mesopotamian gods and cult traditions. This is one reason scholars often see the names as evidence that Marduk was absorbing functions once associated with other deities. That does not necessarily mean those other gods vanished. The Enuma Elish does not erase the divine world. Ea is still there. Anu is still there. Enlil is still there. The great gods continue to have roles and honours. But Marduk now stands above the system. Their powers are not denied. They are gathered beneath his kingship. It is like taking a vast empire of independent kingdoms and placing them under one throne. The old rulers may remain. Their cities may remain. Their traditions may remain, but now there is an emperor. And in the logic of the poem, that emperor is Marduk. This is why the naming sequence matters so much. It is the theological climax of the entire epic. The Enuma Elish begins before heaven and earth, when everything is mixed together in the primordial waters of Apsu and Tiamat. There are no stable borders, no settled world, no clear hierarchy capable of holding the divine generations together. Then comes conflict. Apsu tries to destroy the younger gods. Ea defeats Apsu. Tiamat raises her army. Kingu receives the Tablet of Destinies. The gods panic. Marduk accepts the challenge. He defeats Tiamat and makes a cosmos from the ruins of war. But even after creation, one question remains. Who rules this new cosmos? The answer is not left implied. It is spoken, repeated, built into 50 names. Marduk's kingship is not just the result of brute force. The gods authorize it, they praise it, they organize themselves around it. They place their own safety in the hands of the god who turned chaos into a world they can inhabit. And the poem goes even further. Near its conclusion, it tells its audience to remember these names, to teach them, to ponder them. Fathers are to pass them to sons. The wise are to discuss them. Rulers are to hear them. The names are not buried away as secret information for a few priests. They are meant to be known. That instruction gives the ending a devotional force. The recitation of Marduk's names was likely more than literary decoration. The Enuma Elish itself was associated, at least by the first millennium BCE, with Babylon's Akitu festival, the great New Year celebration. In that ritual setting, speaking the names of Marduk would have renewed the central claim of Babylonian religion. The world is ordered because Marduk rules it. We should be careful here. Our evidence does not let us reconstruct every performance exactly. Ancient rituals changed over time, and surviving tablets do not preserve every spoken word, gesture, or response of the people involved. But the poem makes the importance of recitation unmistakable. To say the names was to remember the victory. To remember the victory was to acknowledge the order created by that victory, and to acknowledge that order was to place Babylon, its temple, its king, its gods, and its people inside Marduk's universe. This is why the Enuma Elish does not end when Tiamat dies. Tiamat's death ends the war. The 50 names establish the kingdom that comes after it. The chaos monster is gone. The cosmos has been made. Humanity has been assigned its work. Babylon has risen as the sacred center. Now Marduk receives what the poem has been moving toward from the beginning. Not just praise, not just a throne, a permanent identity as the god whose power contains every other power. The god who does not merely win the world, the god who becomes its meaning. And that brings us to one of the most famous questions in the study of ancient creation stories. If the Enuma Elish describes a world beginning with primordial waters, followed by the ordering of heaven and earth, the fixing of lights in the sky, the creation of humanity, and the establishment of sacred order, then why does any of that sound familiar? Because another creation account begins with a dark, watery deep. The opening of Genesis says that in the beginning, before the world was fully ordered, darkness covered the face of the deep. The spirit or wind of God moved over the waters. Then God speaks. Light appears. The waters are divided. Dry land emerges. The heavenly lights are appointed. Living things fill the world. Humanity is created. For generations readers have noticed the echoes. Genesis and the Enuma Elish are not the same story. Not even close once you look carefully. But they do inhabit some of the same ancient mental landscape. Both begin before the familiar world exists. Both imagine an early condition associated with water. Both move from an unformed or unsettled beginning toward a structured cosmos. Both describe boundaries being established above and below, sea and land, light and darkness, places assigned to heavenly bodies, functions assigned within the world, and both present creation as more than making physical objects. Creation means order. It means that reality becomes organized, named, bounded, and purposeful. That is the first reason the comparison is so famous. The second is a single Hebrew word. In Genesis, the waters of the deep are called Tehom. In the Enuma Elish, the great saltwater figure is Tiamat. Tehom, Tiamat. The words are not identical. Hebrew and Akkadian are different languages, and words can resemble one another for many reasons. But many scholars have recognized that they may be historically related, descending from an older shared Semitic word connected to the sea or deep waters. And that possibility is enough to make people lean forward. Was Tiamat hiding inside the first lines of Genesis? Did the biblical author take Babylon's dragon goddess and turn her into a nameless body of water? Did Genesis borrow from the Enuma Elish? Those are dramatic questions. They make for dramatic headlines, but history is usually less tidy than a headline. Similarity does not automatically prove copying. Imagine finding flood stories in two ancient cultures. That could mean one culture borrowed from the other. It could mean both drew on a much older shared tradition. It could mean floods were such a terrifying and common human experience that different societies developed similar stories independently. Or it could mean several of those things happened at different times. The same caution applies here. Ancient Mesopotamia, Syria, Canaan, and Israel were not isolated worlds separated by empty space. They were connected by trade, war, migration, diplomacy, royal marriages, conquest, exile, and the movement of scribes, merchants, prisoners, and priests. Ideas travelled, stories travelled, gods travelled. A king could conquer a city, carry off its treasures, relocate its population, and bring its religious language into contact with people who had never chosen to hear it. A merchant could travel with goods in his bags and myths in his memory. A scribe could copy a text in one city, whose traditions had been shaped centuries earlier in another. Israel emerged within this larger ancient Near Eastern world. Its language belongs to the Northwest Semitic family. Its people lived beside and among cultures with long Mesopotamian, Syrian, Egyptian and Canaanite traditions. And later, especially during the Babylonian conquest of Judah in the 6th century BCE, Judean elites encountered Babylonian power at its most overwhelming. Babylon was not an abstract foreign place. It was the empire that destroyed Jerusalem, burned the temple, ended the Judean monarchy, and carried many people into exile. For communities trying to understand catastrophe, Babylonian claims about Marduk, kingship, cosmic order, temples and divine victory would have been impossible to ignore. But that still does not give us a simple equation. Enuma Elish came first. Genesis came later. Therefore, Genesis copied Enuma Elish. That is not what the evidence can prove. For one thing, the biblical texts were composed, edited, preserved, and interpreted over long periods. Scholars debate dates, sources, and the stages through which Genesis reached its final form. The Enuma Elish also has its own complicated history. Its surviving tablets are later copies, while the traditions behind it may be older. We are not comparing two books dropped onto a table at a single moment in time. We are comparing traditions that developed across centuries inside a region where cultures constantly influenced, challenged, and transformed one another. So the cautious scholarly question is not usually, who copied whom? It is more like this. What ideas did these cultures share? Which similarities reflect a common ancient Near Eastern heritage? Which details might show direct contact, adaptation, or argument? And where do the differences become so sharp that Genesis may be responding against the kind of world the Enuma Elish represents? Because the differences are not minor. In the Babylonian story, the world emerges from a divine family crisis. Apsu and Tiamat are primordial waters, but they are also divine beings. The younger gods create noise. Apsu plots murder. Ea strikes first. Tiamat makes war. Marduk fights, kills, cuts, arranges, and rules. Creation comes after combat. The cosmos is built from the body of a defeated goddess. Genesis has waters too. It has darkness too. It has a deep. But there is no battle. No rival god rises from the sea. No divine council trembles before a monster. No creator needs weapons, winds, nets, or an army. God speaks, and the world obeys. That difference is going to matter enormously. Because when we place Genesis beside the Enuma Elish, we do not just find possible echoes from the ancient world. We find two radically different answers to the same enormous question. What was there before the world began, and what kind of power turned chaos into order? So let's slow down and look at that one word, Tehom. In Hebrew, Tehom means the deep or the great watery abyss. In Genesis 1:2, darkness is over the face of Tehom. It is there before dry land, before plants, before stars, before animals, before human beings. It is part of the raw, unshaped condition from which the ordered world will emerge, and to anyone who knows the Enuma Elish, the resemblance can feel almost impossible to miss. Tiamat, the primordial saltwater power, the mother of gods, the vast sea transformed into a divine person, the being Marduk must face before he can establish order in the universe. Tehom, Tiamat, say them slowly. You can hear why scholars started asking questions. The comparison has been especially attractive because the words appear to belong to the same broad linguistic world. Akkadian, the language of the Enuma Elish, is an East Semitic language. Hebrew is Northwest Semitic. They are not the same language, but they are related, like distant branches of a much larger family. And across ancient Semitic languages, there are words connected to seas, depths, watery chaos, and the great abyss beneath the world. So one possibility is that Tehom and Tiamat preserve traces of an older shared word. Not necessarily a single story copied word for word, not necessarily one author borrowing a name from another author, but an inherited pool of imagery, language, and ideas that existed long before either text reached the form we know. Think of it like two distant families preserving different versions of an old ancestor's name. One family changes the pronunciation, the other changes the meaning. Centuries pass, new stories are told, new places become important, new gods rise, but somewhere in the language a faint family resemblance remains. That is one way scholars have understood the connection. The ancient Near East was full of stories about waters that existed before the ordered world. This makes sense. Water gives life, but uncontrolled water destroys life. Rivers flood, storms erase fields, the sea swallows ships. A drought can kill a city, but too much water can kill one too. For people living between the Tigris and Euphrates, where seasonal flooding could bring both fertility and catastrophe, the deep was never just a peaceful image. It was power, it was abundance, it was danger, and in many ancient myths that danger could become personal. The sea could be imagined as a monster, a dragon, a hostile god, or a force that had to be subdued before the world became safe for human life. The Enuma Elish takes that imagination and turns it into cosmic warfare. Tiamat is not merely water. She is water with intention. She grieves. She becomes enraged. She creates an army. She appoints Kingu. She challenges the younger gods. And when Marduk defeats her, he does not simply move water around. He kills a divine opponent and makes the structure of the cosmos from her divided body. That is mythic combat on the largest possible scale. But then we open Genesis. Darkness was over the face of the deep. The word Tehom is there. Yet something extraordinary has happened. The deep does not speak. The deep does not plan revenge. The deep does not produce monsters to attack God. The deep does not appoint a commander. The deep does not have to be killed. It is simply there, part of the created scene, beneath the authority of God. And then God speaks, "Let there be light," not "Let me gather my army," not "Which God will fight for us," not "Who can defeat the sea." God speaks and light exists. Later, God separates waters from waters. He gathers the waters so dry land can appear. He sets limits. The sea has a place, but it is not a rival kingdom. It is not an enemy equal to the Creator. It is a part of creation receiving boundaries and function. That difference is the heart of the question. Did Genesis preserve an ancient memory of Tiamat in the word Tehom? Possibly in some distant linguistic or cultural sense. Did the author of Genesis take the Babylonian goddess, strip away her name, and quietly leave her in the opening verse? That is much harder to prove. Some scholars argue that the resemblance is too strong to dismiss. Tiamat and Tehom both belong to primordial waters. Both appear in creation settings. Both may descend from an older Semitic term for the sea or the deep. And Genesis was formed in a world saturated with Mesopotamian traditions. It would be surprising if Israelite writers had never encountered Babylonian ideas, especially during and after the exile. But other scholars urge caution. Words that come from the same ancient linguistic background do not always carry the same meaning. English gives us a simple example. Host can mean a party giver, a large army, or a computer machine. Shared sound does not guarantee shared theology. Shared ancestry does not prove that one text is secretly retelling another. And Tehom, grammatically and narratively, is not Tiamat. Tiamat is a character. She has agency. She acts. She makes decisions. She speaks through the drama of the story. Tehom in Genesis is not presented that way. It has no personality, no genealogy, no divine title, no will, no battle, no death. There is no moment where God stands before the deep and says, "I will destroy you." There is no cosmic corpse. There is no creation from a slain enemy. That absence may be deliberate, or it may simply reflect a fundamentally different theological vision. Either way it matters, because Genesis takes the ancient image of dangerous, formless waters and removes the terror of divine competition. In the Enuma Elish, the waters are a god. In Genesis, the waters are under God. In the Enuma Elish, order requires victory over a rival power. In Genesis, order arrives through command. That does not mean Genesis has no sense of chaos. It absolutely does. The deep is dark. The waters are unbounded. The world is not yet arranged for life. But chaos is never allowed to become God's equal. That is a massive claim. The Creator does not inherit the universe from older gods. He does not bargain for authority. He does not win kingship by surviving a war. He is already sovereign over darkness, water, land, sky, and time itself. One small word, Tehom, opens a door into a much larger world. It may preserve a faint echo of ancient shared language. It may show that biblical writers and Babylonian poets were both thinking with images older than either tradition. It reminds us that Genesis did not appear in an intellectual vacuum. But the same word also reveals a break. The Babylonian deep becomes Tiamat, a goddess who must be defeated. The Hebrew deep remains Tehom, silent before the voice of God. And that is where the comparison becomes more than a word game. Because the real contrast is not simply Tiamat versus Tehom. It is combat versus command. It is a universe won through violence versus a universe ordered by speech. And once you see that difference, the opening of Genesis starts to sound less like a copy of the Enuma Elish, and more like a startling answer to it. And that answer becomes even clearer when we place the two creation stories side by side, because both stories move through a strangely familiar sequence. There is darkness, there are primordial waters, then comes the ordering of the sky, then the arrangement of the heavenly bodies, then the world becomes a place where life can exist. Then human beings appear. At first glance, that can feel like a blueprint, like Genesis and the Enuma Elish are following the same cosmic map. But the deeper you look, the more the differences start to matter. In the Enuma Elish, creation begins as a family crisis among gods. Apsu and Tiamat produce younger divine generations. The younger gods make noise. Apsu wants them destroyed. Ea strikes first and kills Apsu. Tiamat responds by raising an army. Kingu receives the Tablet of Destinies. Marduk offers to save the gods, but only if they grant him supreme authority. Then comes the battle, wind against sea, net against monster, arrow against heart. The universe that follows is built on the aftermath of that war. Marduk splits Tiamat's body. One half becomes the sky. One half becomes the earth. He fixes the stars, establishes the calendar, orders the moon, sets boundaries for the waters, and founds a stable world from the remains of a defeated enemy. In Genesis there is no divine family drama. No older god plotting against younger gods. No council desperately searching for someone strong enough to save them. No god bargaining for kingship. No challenger holding the fate of the cosmos in its hands. Genesis opens with one god already present, already acting, already sovereign. That is not a small change. It changes the entire logic of creation. Marduk has to become king. The god of Genesis does not become king. He begins as king. Marduk's authority is confirmed through victory. God's authority in Genesis is revealed through speech. Let there be light, and there is light. No weapon. No struggle. No resistance. Just command. Now think about what happens next in both stories. Marduk establishes the heavens after defeating Tiamat. He organizes the stars. He assigns stations to the gods. He regulates the moon so that months and seasons can be measured. The sky becomes an administrative structure. It is part of the order Marduk imposes after chaos has been conquered. Genesis also moves toward order in the heavens. Light is separated from darkness. Waters are divided. A firmament appears between them. Dry land emerges. Then the lights in the sky are set in place to mark days, seasons, and years. The sequence is not identical, the meaning is not identical. But both texts are deeply concerned with the same basic human question. How did this world become reliable? Why does the sky stay above us? Why does the sea stop where the land begins? Why do the seasons return? Why do the sun and moon move in patterns we can recognize? For ancient people, those were not abstract scientific questions. They were survival questions. If the waters had no boundary, fields vanished. If the seasons failed, cities starved. If the heavens became unpredictable, the entire rhythm of agriculture, ritual, travel, and kingship was threatened. Both stories describe a cosmos that has become ordered enough for human life. But again, the route to that order could not be more different. In the Enuma Elish, the world is secured because Marduk defeats chaos in battle. In Genesis, the world is ordered because God names, separates, gathers, and blesses. Notice those verbs: separates, calls, makes, sets, blesses. They are calm words, administrative words, almost. The language of a ruler whose authority does not need to prove itself through force. Even the great lights of heaven receive a different treatment. In Babylonian religion, the heavenly bodies were closely tied to divine powers and celestial signs. The movements of the stars, moon, and planets could be read as messages from the gods. Marduk's ordering of the heavens helps establish a divine system in which gods have places, duties, and cosmic significance. Genesis does something remarkably restrained. It does not even name the sun and moon in the usual way. Instead, it calls them the greater light and the lesser light. Why avoid their names? Some scholars think this may be significant. In the ancient Near East, names associated with the sun and moon could also be divine names. By calling them simply lights, Genesis may be stripping them of independent divine status. They are not gods. They are not rivals. They are not beings to be feared or worshipped. They are lamps in the sky, created things, servants of time. And then human beings enter the picture. In the Enuma Elish, humanity is made after the war because the gods are tired of labour. Kingu is executed, his blood is mixed with clay, and humans are created to bear the burdens of the gods. They maintain temples. They provide food offerings. They perform the work that frees the divine assembly from exhausting labour. Humanity has a place in the cosmic order, but it is a subordinate place. Humans exist because the gods need workers. Genesis also gives humans a role in an ordered world, but the framing is dramatically different. Human beings are made in the image of God. They are told to fill the earth, govern living creatures, and exercise responsibility within creation. The text raises difficult questions about power, rule, and what image really means. But it does not describe humanity as divine slave labour created to feed exhausted gods. The difference is theological and political. In one story, the world is a kingdom won by a warrior god, and humans help maintain the temple-centred order that follows. In the other, the world is spoken into being by a creator who needs no victory, no food, no labor force, and no permission from other gods. So was Genesis written as a direct attack on Babylonian mythology. Maybe this is where scholars use the word polemic. A polemic is not just a disagreement, it is a text or argument shaped to challenge another view. Some scholars think Genesis deliberately takes familiar ancient Near Eastern images, dark waters, cosmic ordering, heavenly lights, the creation of humans, and retells them in a way that denies the basic assumptions behind stories like the Enuma Elish. No divine war, no divine genealogy, no monster equal to God, no sun god, no moon god, no humanity created to serve the needs of heaven. That is a powerful case, but it is still an interpretation, not a certainty stamped onto the tablets or written in the margin of Genesis. We do not possess a note from a biblical author saying, "This was written against Babylon." Ancient texts rarely make our job that easy. Genesis may be responding directly to Mesopotamian tradition, or it may be drawing from a wider shared world of ancient imagery while expressing its own distinct vision. It may be both. What we can say is that the similarities are real enough to invite comparison, and the differences are sharp enough to make that comparison meaningful. If we only say, both stories begin with water, we miss the point. If we only say Genesis is completely different, we also miss the point. The power of the comparison lies in seeing both at once. Both imagine a world emerging from watery disorder. Both describe the establishment of light, sky, celestial time, and human life. But one universe is born from combat. The other is ordered by command. And that contrast leads directly to the next question. If humans are not made to carry the workload of tired gods, then what exactly are they made for? The answer depends on which world you are standing in. In the Enuma Elish, humanity is created because the gods have a problem. Marduk has defeated Tiamat. He has organized the heavens. He has assigned places and responsibilities to the gods. The cosmic emergency is over, but somebody still has to do the work. The gods complain that their labor is heavy. They need temples maintained. They need offerings presented. They need the daily structure of worship carried out. So Marduk proposes a solution. Kingu, the god who had supported Tiamat and received the Tablet of Destinies, is condemned. His blood is used in the creation of humankind. Humans are made to take up the burden. That sounds harsh to modern ears, and it is easy to reduce it to one sentence. In Babylon, people were created as slaves of the gods. But that slogan is too simple. Yes, the Enuma Elish connects human existence with service. Temple labor, offerings, ritual duties, and the maintenance of divine order are central to its vision. But ancient Mesopotamian worship was not understood as meaningless busywork for distant gods. The temple was the meeting point between heaven and earth. It was where the city's relationship with the divine world was maintained. To serve the gods was, in that worldview, to help sustain the order that made city life possible. Fields needed rain. Rivers needed to follow their courses. Armies needed protection. Kings needed legitimacy. Families needed children. The gods governed all of it. Human ritual did not make people equal to the gods. Far from it, but it gave them a defined place in a universe ruled from above. And at the center of that universe stood Babylon. The Enuma Elish is not merely telling us why humans work. It is also explaining why Babylon's temples matter, why Marduk deserves worship, and why the king who rules in Marduk's city rules within a sacred order established after primordial war. Human beings serve, kings govern, priests perform rituals. Gods receive honor. Marduk stands above them all. Now compare that with Genesis. Genesis says human beings are made in the image of God. That phrase has generated thousands of years of interpretation, and it should not be flattened into a modern slogan either. Does image mean human intelligence, moral responsibility, the capacity for relationship with God, spiritual nature, creative ability, possibly some combination of these? But many scholars point to an ancient Near Eastern background that makes the phrase even more political. In the ancient world, an image of a god could be a statue placed in a temple. It represented the god's presence and authority in a particular place. Kings, too, could be described in image-like language. A king represented divine rule on earth. Genesis makes a startling move. It does not reserve that representative role for one royal figure. Male and female, the text says, are made in God's image. Humankind collectively is given a role that ancient societies often connected, especially with kings. They are told to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and exercise dominion over other living things. That word, dominion, has caused enormous debate. Read carelessly. It can sound like permission to exploit the world without limits. And throughout history, people have sometimes used it that way. But Genesis also contains another picture of human work. In the garden story, the human is placed in Eden to cultivate it and keep it. Work is not presented simply as a punishment or a burden imposed after disaster. It is part of humanity's original calling to cultivate, to guard, to govern, to live within creation without pretending to be its creator. That is why stewardship has become such an important interpretation. Humans have authority, but it is delegated authority. The earth is not theirs in the absolute sense. They rule within a world that belongs to God. Still, stewardship is also a later summary word, not a complete translation of Genesis. The text contains kingship language. It contains agricultural language. It contains priestly echoes. It contains blessing, responsibility, and limits. No single modern phrase captures all of it, and work itself remains important in both stories. The difference is not that Babylonian people work while biblical people do not. Everybody works. Farmers work. Builders work. Kings work. Priests work. Families work. Ancient life demanded labour on a scale most of us can barely imagine. The real question is what that work means. In the Enuma Elish, human work is tied to relieving the gods of their burdens and maintaining the temple-centered order of Marduk's world. In Genesis, human work is tied to bearing God's image within creation, cultivating the land, exercising rule, multiplying life, and living under the authority of the one Creator. Worship matters in both worlds. Sacred order matters in both worlds. Human beings are not accidents in either account. They are assigned a role, but the identity they receive is different because the divine reality behind them is different. In the Enuma Elish, humanity comes from the blood of a defeated rebel after a war among gods. Their role belongs to a cosmos stabilized by Marduk's victory. In Genesis, humanity is created by the deliberate act of one sovereign God and declared to bear that God's image. Their role belongs to a cosmos pronounced good before they ever enter it. And this is why the human creation scenes reveal more than the opening waters ever could. Darkness, deep, and sea may look familiar across the ancient world. But ask why humans exist, what their labour is for, who they represent, and what kind of God stands over them. And the two stories begin to move in very different directions. Those differences matter, but they also bring us to the question that hangs over this entire story. What can we actually know? Not what we wish the tablets said. Not what later readers have claimed they prove. Not what we can make them mean if we pull one phrase out of context and place it beside a verse from Genesis. What can we know from the evidence we have? Quite a lot, actually. We know the Enuma Elish was a major Babylonian composition. We know its surviving copies were written in Akkadian on clay tablets. We know the best-known version was discovered in the ruins of Nineveh, in the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, centuries after Babylon had become the great city of Marduk. We know the poem exalts Marduk above the other gods. It tells how he defeats Tiamat, creates and organizes the cosmos, establishes Babylon as the center of sacred order, and receives 50 names that proclaim his power. We know it was connected to ritual life, especially the Babylonian New Year festival, the Akitu. Ancient sources strongly suggest that the poem was recited in that setting. This was not a private fantasy text, not a story told only for entertainment after dinner. It was part of a public sacred world, a world of temples, kings, priests, processions, sacrifices, and the yearly renewal of political and cosmic order. And that context changes everything. The Enuma Elish was not trying to answer modern scientific questions. It was not trying to explain the chemical composition of the first oceans, the age of the earth, or the evolution of life. It was asking a different set of questions. Why is the world ordered rather than chaotic? Why does Babylon stand at the center? Why does Marduk deserve supreme honor? Why do the gods receive service from human beings? Why should kingship, temple ritual, and city life be understood as part of the structure of the universe itself? Those are real questions, not primitive versions of modern science. Different questions asked by people living in a different kind of world. But the tablets also withhold a great deal. We do not possess the original Enuma Elish. That is one of the first facts people forget. The tablets in museums are copies. Some are more complete than others. Some are damaged. Some preserve lines missing elsewhere. Scholars compare them, reconstruct broken passages, and try to identify the most likely wording. But the earliest version that first took shape in Babylon is gone. We do not know exactly when the poem was composed. Many scholars connect it with the rise of Marduk and Babylon during the 2nd millennium BCE, perhaps especially the period when Babylon became a major political power. But perhaps matters. The poem may preserve older myths, older divine names, older ideas about watery chaos and creation. It may have been revised over time. It may have gathered traditions that once existed separately and turned them into a powerful declaration of Babylonian theology. Think about that. A poem can be ancient and still have a history. A story does not emerge from nowhere in a single perfect form. It gets repeated, adapted, written down, copied by scribes, performed in rituals, reinterpreted by kings and priests who see new meaning in old words. The version we have may represent the end of a long process, not the beginning. And there are other questions we cannot settle. How fixed was the Akitu recitation? Did every city perform the poem in exactly the same way? Probably not. How much did ordinary Babylonians know about its details? We cannot interview them. Did they hear it as literal history, sacred drama, political theology, ritual truth, or all of those at once? The evidence gives us clues, but not a recording of their private thoughts. Ancient people did not always separate categories the way we do. For us, something is often placed into one box: history, religion, literature, science, fiction, propaganda. But the Enuma Elish can be religious, political, poetic, and deeply meaningful all at the same time. Calling it just a myth can miss that entirely. Today, the word myth often means a false story. Something made up, something people believed before they knew better. But in the study of ancient religions, myth means something more serious. A myth is a story that organizes reality. It explains where authority comes from. It gives suffering, work, kingship, and ritual a place in the larger order of things. That does not turn the Enuma Elish into a literal scientific report. Tiamat is not a fossilized sea monster waiting to be discovered beneath the Persian Gulf. Marduk's net and storm winds are not laboratory descriptions of planetary formation. But neither is the poem trivial fiction. It is evidence. Evidence of how Babylonian intellectuals, priests, rulers, and scribes imagined the relationship between chaos and order, between city and cosmos, between divine power and human obligation. And this brings us back to Genesis. Did the Enuma Elish influence the biblical creation story? The honest answer is more complicated than yes or no. The Israelites and Babylonians lived within the larger world of the ancient Near East. They shared geographical regions, trade routes, empires, languages, political pressures, and long traditions of storytelling. Biblical writers did not compose their texts in a vacuum. Babylonian culture, especially during periods of conquest and exile, was impossible to ignore. So contact is historically real. Shared traditions are also real. Creation stories from across Mesopotamia contain waters, divine beings, cosmic order, human purpose, and the dangerous possibility of chaos. Genesis uses words and images that would have sounded familiar in that world. But familiarity is not the same thing as direct borrowing, and direct borrowing is not the same thing as agreement. Genesis may preserve shared ancient patterns. It may respond to Mesopotamian ideas. It may deliberately reshape images that Babylonian audiences would recognize, or some similarities may reflect traditions far older than either text in its surviving form. The evidence does not let us reduce the relationship to a simple equation. Enuma Elish came first, therefore Genesis copied it. That is too easy. Genesis is completely unrelated to its ancient environment. That is too easy too. The truth is harder and more interesting. Ancient texts often speak to one another across centuries without being identical. They borrow, reject, transform, preserve, and argue. They can use the same raw materials and build entirely different worlds. And maybe that is why this creation war still fascinates us. Because it begins with a fear we still understand. What if order is fragile? What if beneath the world we know there is something violent, ancient, and hungry? What if peace is not the natural state of things, but something won through struggle? The Enuma Elish answers that fear with Marduk's victory. Chaos is not denied. It is confronted, defeated, divided, named, and forced into a structure that can sustain life. Genesis answers differently. Its God does not need to fight the sea. The deep is present, but it is never a rival. Creation arrives by command. Two ancient visions, one world born from combat, one world ordered by speech, and yet both begin where every human imagination eventually begins, at the edge of darkness, looking into the unknown, asking how anything stable could ever emerge at all. And maybe that is the final surprise of the Enuma Elish. The war happens before the beginning, before there are fields to plant, before there are cities to rule, before there are human beings to pray, work, rebel, remember, and write stories about where they came from. Before heaven has been properly separated from earth, the universe is already in crisis. There are waters, there are gods, there is tension building beneath the surface. Apsu, the freshwater deep, wants silence. Tiamat, the saltwater sea, becomes the force of chaos and vengeance. Ea defeats Apsu. Then Marduk rises, young, powerful, and terrifyingly capable. He does not inherit authority quietly. He receives it because the other gods are desperate. They need someone who can face Tiamat and survive. And Marduk makes them a deal. If he wins, he will rule. Not as one god among many, not as a temporary military commander, as king of the gods. the one whose word establishes order. Then comes the battle. Tiamat creates an army. She elevates Kingu and gives him the Tablet of Destinies, the object that symbolizes authority over the cosmic order. Marduk goes out to meet her with winds, weapons, and a net. He traps her, overpowers her, kills her, and from her defeated body he makes the world. That is the image at the center of the poem. Creation is not peaceful. It is not effortless. The sky and the earth emerge from the remains of a conquered enemy. The world is structured chaos. Order is something imposed upon the violent waters that came before it. Then humanity enters the story, not as the crown of creation in the modern sense, not as beings placed in a garden simply to enjoy a finished world. Humans are made after the war from the blood of Kingu, the defeated leader of Tiamat's forces. Their role is clear. They are created to take on labour so the gods can be freed from it. They maintain temples. They offer food and sacrifice. They keep the sacred and social order functioning. And at the centre of that order stands Babylon. Marduk's city becomes more than a city. It becomes the place where heaven and earth are joined, where divine authority is recognized, where the victory over chaos is renewed through ritual, kingship, and worship. The Enuma Elish is not only telling people how the cosmos began, it is telling them why their world is arranged the way it is, why Marduk is supreme, why Babylon matters, why human work has a sacred place in the structure of reality. That is what makes this poem so much more than an ancient monster story. But it also helps explain why people keep placing it beside Genesis. Both texts come from the wider world of the ancient Near East. Both speak about waters before the ordered world. Both ask how chaos becomes a cosmos. Both give human beings a role within a universe shaped by divine power. And yet they remain profoundly different. In the Enuma Elish, the world is made through divine conflict. A god must defeat a rival. Chaos has a face, a body, an army, and a weapon. Order is won in battle. In Genesis, there is no war between equal divine powers. The waters are there, but they do not threaten God. The deep does not have to be killed. God speaks, and the world takes shape. That difference is not small, it changes everything. So was Genesis copied from the Enuma Elish? That question sounds simple. It is not. The two traditions existed in related ancient worlds. There were real contacts between cultures, shared images, borrowed words, inherited stories, and arguments carried across generations. Biblical writers knew the world of Mesopotamia, especially in the shadow of Babylonian power. But similarity does not prove copying. And copying, if it happened in any form, would not mean simple imitation. Ancient writers could take familiar ideas and transform them. They could answer a rival culture by reversing its assumptions. They could preserve old patterns while giving them radically new meaning. Maybe that is the better question. Not which story copied which. But what kind of world does each story imagine? Is the universe founded on victory over chaos? On the authority of a king? On the labour humans owe to the gods? Or is creation an act of command, gift, and purpose from a god with no rival? Creation stories are never only about the past. They shape power. They shape identity. They tell people where they belong. They explain why cities matter, why rulers rule, why work is necessary, why suffering exists, and whether the universe is ultimately hostile, ordered, or both. The Enuma Elish leaves us standing at the edge of those primordial waters, watching a world emerge from war, and asking a question that may be older than Babylon itself. What story are we living in? If you enjoyed this journey into the Enuma Elish, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. And if you want to support the channel in the best possible way, listen on Spotify. The link is in the description.